job of filmmakers and historians is in many ways very similar. We do a lot of research, and we perform, create narratives, and those narratives have to hold together based on they have to hold up. I mean, in terms of first of all truth, if you're talking about nonfiction filmmaking, and also they have to be persuasive, comprehensible to the audience, and I like to make films that would have a certain impact. So that's something that you have to bear in mind. How do you achieve that? How do you, and for me also very important, and I think in history as well as in filmmaking, to not preach to the choir, but to actually try to bring people into the conversation who are not naturally inclined to necessarily be sympathetic to your point of view. I just think that's a much more interesting approach. And I also feel like, there's not a lot, for me, not a lot of utility in preaching to the choir. It doesn't excite me intellectually or, as a storyteller either. So I would much rather actually, I don't want to necessarily change people's minds, but actually give them a different perspective that is compelling and persuasive to them, that might make them reconsider some of the views they hold. Because you have to understand how people form their views. They're heavily influenced by a lot of regressive forces. I mean, especially, if I say in India, the media landscape is a highly regressive landscape. So that, people might think that, I have a lot of information and therefore I form my opinions on that information. But that is very rarely the case. In fact, the information is heavily filtered, heavily doctored. And so, we as filmmakers, I think, have a special role in shedding light on things where there's no light being shone. And, Fire in the Blood is actually a good example of that. Whose interest was it to tell that story? And whose interest was it that story not be told? The latter group is much larger and much more powerful, well-resourced and influential. So, those are things you always have to bear in mind. The public is not, I don't think there's a lot of evil people out there in the public who naturally are hateful and want to hurt others. But, there's a lot of information being directed their way, which makes them incline often to that viewpoint. And, it's our job as historians, as filmmakers, as writers, as people who are involved in communication, to try to mitigate that and to try to like I said, shine a light in areas where there's no light being found, and use a different lens. And you have to have a certain amount of empathy and love in your heart, to do that, because otherwise you'll just get very angry, and anger it's not very useful in terms of changing things for the better. I mean, it has its place, but if you're just operating from a place of anger, you are going to probably be met with anger. So, that's how I think of it anyway.
This point that you spoke about, having empathy enough to be able to channelize your energy. Like, anger is not enough. So,
no.
Do you feel? Would you like to elaborate on that? Because I think it's really pertinent for people like us who are just starting out, and like with example.
I mean, let's say, let me just sort of try to cut to the chase, because I know, I've done a number of panels like this, and I know that a lot of people who log on, or will log on later in Facebook and what have you, are people that are starting out their careers or considering careers as filmmakers or somehow in the film industry. And I think, the paradigm is, you have options, different routes that you can choose, and you can choose several routes, but you're not locked into one or the other. But one of the things, I hear a lot from people is that they want to sort of make use of the platforms that have sort of come to the fore in recent times. And if you look at a Netflix, for example, I'm very happy that Fire in the Blood is on Netflix. It wasn't made for Netflix, and it was very much I made the film I wanted to make. It took a very long time, and it took a lot of effort, and it cost me a lot of things over the period. But one thing I'm very happy about is I did make the film I wanted to make, that I thought was important to make. And first and foremost, I made that film to set the record straight and to create a record, because there was none. And in the absence of a record, things will be lost. Lessons of humanity and history will be lost, and of course, then the record then becomes also perverted. In the absence uh, of a proper factual account
Yeah.
with the key protagonist. That as I said, there are a lot of people who had a vested interest in that story not being told in a compelling way or a convincing way. So it was very important to create a document that could stand the test of time, and I'm very happy the film continues to be extremely relevant, especially now, of course, with what's happening in the world with COVID, et cetera, but also widely viewed both on Netflix and with special screenings that happen all the time in all corners of the world. So I'm really, really grateful for that, and I think the film deserves it. To be honest, it's not that I deserve it. I think the story, and the people in that film are very, very strong, protagonists, and they really give you a lot of feeling of power and hope about being able to change things in the world. Not just in that kind of health area or political area. I mean, in any area. We have protagonists in that film who seemingly had no power whatsoever, but because truth and justice were on their side, were able to actually change the world in an extremely meaningful way. So, that's something that I think is very strong. And if you want to sort of reach out beyond the echo chamber of whatever your echo chamber may be, and to have a platform like a Netflix, you're not going to. I mean, you have to take a big tent approach in a way. You have to be able to do something that has a wide appeal, and of course, being being entertaining is part of that as well. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be sort of song and dance routine, but you have to bear in mind that, again, if your objective is not to preach to the choir and just tell them what they want to hear and sort of you know nicely package their talking points, then you have to, what I call, use, I mean, like a spoonful of sugar, let's say. So if I'm making a film about Vijay Mallya, that film is actually about much more than Vijay Mallya, but people will watch it because it's about Vijay Mallya, and in the process they will experience a lot of things, and think about a lot of things that, if I made a film about you know pre and post liberalization capitalism in India, or the changing views around alcohol in India, those people would not watch that film, because that topic would not jump off the page for them or jump off the screen for them. But because I can sort of filter it or direct it through the conduit of something that they have an innate interest in, uh, you know, then it opens up a canvas to have some very, very interesting conversations. So this is the thing. I mean, but that doesn't mean that's the only way of doing it. If I look at From Durban to Tomorrow, for example, see that's a film which was made with a very different kind of target, a different type of approach. It's a film that is much more directed towards people who are, in their daily lives, have some occupation with the idea of human rights and of global health and how these two things fit together. So, it's a film that is much more likely to be programmed at human rights film festivals, for example, where people have a sort of baseline interest in human rights and connection to it. And it's a film that will be used in a lot of, and is being used in a lot of advocacy work with policymakers, with the medical community, with the activist community, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's a different approach. There's not a one size fits all. It depends. I think as filmmakers, every single project, the first question you ask yourself is, why am I making this film? Who is it for? And what is it meant to achieve? Because, when I ask people, so when people come to me with projects, either because they want me to be part of the project, or they want mentorship or advice, that's what I asked them. I said, who is your audience? And oftentimes filmmakers will say, it was really for everybody. And okay, you want your films to be for everybody, but that actually is not a useful answer. You have to really understand who your audience is and what do you want to achieve. Now, and then you work backwards from there. It's not enough to have an interesting idea or an interesting topic, because the distance between idea and film is very long, so unless you have a very clear concept of who your audience is, why you're making it for, what you want them to feel, what you want them to take away. Do you want your film to be a conversation starter? Do you want it to be the last word? um, what is your objective? It doesn't have to be a political objective or a social objective. It really just has to be a filmmaking objective, which oftentimes does translate into either a political. When I say political, it's a small p political. It doesn't mean like, oh, I want people to vote for a certain party. It might mean I want people to sort of think about, like, I wrote an article some time back, which is sort of recirculated recently, that was inspired by, I saw how people, in Europe were denigrating the refugees that were coming from the Middle East. That refugee wave came. And I was like, that made me think about my mother. My mother was a refugee, right? So I wrote about it. I felt it was important to make some people think, okay, like, these aren't faceless hordes. These are human beings with individual stories and experiences. And my own mother was one of them, So if somebody can read that and be like, okay, I can look at this slightly differently, that's a valuable thing. So, we do that. Those are, I think, healthy objectives for filmmakers. And, the thing is also, if you're a filmmaker and you go through a lot of ups and downs in getting your projects made, if the project is really personally important to you, it gives you a lot of energy that will sustain you through those difficult periods and those challenges, because there will be a lot of people saying, not interested, a lot of doors slammed in your face, not going to help you, we don't think it's good, it's dangerous for you, all kinds of things people will say, So I think to anybody that wants to make films, that actually make sure you do something that you personally are very strongly invested in. And then, that gives you a lot of power and strength, and it enables you to sort of ride the wave of a lot of obstacles and negativity that will come your way.